Hi. So I'm going to try to cover as many different types of ways that you can kind of develop a career and build a career in the game industry. I know most of you here are probably looking to start your career as a game designer, but some of you might have other skill sets that would apply in the game world, and that might actually be a way for you to start to build a career. So throughout this, it's going to be very top level. I have some opinions on some things that you can do to help build a career, and then I'm also going to talk about how my career developed and how I did it. And some of those things are not going to sync up because I have now the benefit of hindsight, where I could look back and say, well, maybe I could have done this a little bit differently, and I would have done this not quite the same way. And then in some ways, I did some things that I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you do, because I would never tell somebody to quit their job when their wife is pregnant with their first child, like I did. I mean, if you want to do that, that's awesome, but I'm probably not going to tell you to do it. So our topic here is making your passion your career. And really here I wanted to focus on, I'm not really emphasizing getting a job. It's building a career. A lot of times, you'll see job postings from different game companies, and you'll kind of give it, take a shot. Like maybe even if it's not the job that you really want. And that can sometimes work, but more often than not, it's not going to be your best way to build that career in the game industry. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. So my first question would be, what do you want to do? And let's show of hands, who here is really focused on game design? Okay, not everybody. So, game design is definitely, today, probably the most popular thing that everybody, wants to pursue as a career, and that's a totally valid career. And as we kind of go through this, I'm going to touch on that a little bit by itself, because I think that takes a slightly different path, and there's a lot of different options. But there's lots. There we go. There's lots of different things that you can do in the game industry that are very viable careers. So graphic design is one. Right now, graphic designers, I believe, especially in the board game space, are probably the unsung heroes of the game industry. A graphic designer can take your game that might be a really good game and make it a great game. Because at the end of the day, a game is only as good as the whole of its product, right? Like, it has to be marketable, it has to be something that somebody can experience and have fun with, and that graphic designer can be your best friend. And I would say that there's a need for high-end, high-quality graphic designers that understand our space. And that's the key. Like, really understanding our space makes a good graphic designer great for us. Game design, of course, is up there. Marketing. Marketing is probably one of the easiest, and none of them are easy, but one of the most accessible ways to enter the game world, right? Marketing is usually has a lot of entry-level opportunities. It tends to lean towards people that come from within that space, because our type of marketing and most are very specialized, but especially ours, like we're a niche industry. And marketing to a board game audience or a gaming audience tends to be better when it comes from somebody from that audience, right? I can pull in the best marketing person from a Fortune 500 company, and they'll know the methods and aims and techniques, but they don't really know our customer, right? So they're probably not going to do as good of a job. So, if you have some schooling or training or like a bent for marketing, that could be a good way to get your foot in the door. Other things like sales and finance, my least favorite thing. So in my company, my wife is our controller. She was in banking. She actually used to be an auditor and a loan officer before she stopped working to have kids and start a family. And then when I started Renegade, I said, "You're coming out of retirement," and she was super thrilled about that. A producer, sales publisher, media content, distribution, my second least favorite thing. Distribution is like logistics, but some people are very good at that, and it's necessary. Editors. This is an area where we do not have enough high-quality editors. Game designers. You are the last people that should actually finish your rule books. It's just the way it works, right? Like when you are so close to your content and you are writing your rules, you miss things, right? An editor, again, can make that rule book really, really shine and really deliver a quality experience to your player. Right now, there are very few high-quality editors in our industry. There is one in particular that is extremely overworked and backed up, and everybody uses him, and he's phenomenal, and we all know who he is. But really, we need more. So this is a skill set that if you have, there is a need for it. Writers, artists, and the one I wanted to talk a little bit about is producer, because producer is not really a position that is comes from our industry. It's traditionally something from video games and Hollywood, but it's becoming more prevalent, and some companies call it different things, like a brand manager. But even that, a brand manager in some industries tends to be a little bit more marketing focused. And a producer really that's really what I came to realize after about 20 years. That's my skill set, because my history and the way I started in the industry allowed me to experience so many different facets of the business side and the creative development side, and really everything is that now I can kind of take all of that and pull it together, and that's really what I do, is I produce. So my start in the industry was I decided to open up a game store. I was working for somebody else and doing my typical thing, one of my first real jobs out of school. And I was working for this retail chain of stores, and I was opening up new stores. And I had a retail background. I grew up in my family's retail business. And I was opening up these stores and training staff and getting them going. And these were stores from 5,000 to 15,000 square feet. And the goal for this owner was to build up a chain and then sell it out to a national chain. And I did that for a little over 2 years and killed myself. And I was driving all over the place and opened 7 stores in about 18, 19 months, and went on vacation and came back from vacation and said, I'm done. And I had always had kind of dabbled, right, in our industry. I grew up reading comic books, and through school, I actually bought comic book collections and sold comic books at conventions on the weekends, and I grew up playing games, right? I have the typical story that most people have. I played D&D when I was in middle school, and, played Magic a little bit, when it first came out, and all sorts of stuff. And then in 1996, I said, I'm done, and I came home, and I told my wife that I was quitting my job, and I was going to do pop culture, comic books and games and all that sort of stuff full time. We had a little mail order business where I was selling stuff. This was in the infancy of eBay. I was selling collectibles on eBay and stuff like that. And I said, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to open a store because I can't work from home and everything else. And she said, okay. And she had her job at the bank, and we figured that she was going to have our first son, and she was going to keep working. And then after 3 months of going back to work, she came home and she said, I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And I said, all right, let's give it a try. So we gave it a try, and I owned my store for about 8 years, and it went pretty well. So what I decided to do was that, I ran my store, and I loved running my store, but I wanted to do more, and my store focused on Decipher games. Where everybody else in my community was fighting over Magic, I decided to be the Star Wars store. And we built up a phenomenal player base of Star Wars players, and that drew the attention of Decipher, the publisher of that game. And we were doing some innovative things with organized play and marketing, and they came to me at some point around 98 or 99 and said, would you like to consult for us and write some marketing plans and promotions and help us revamp some of our organized play stuff? And I said, sure. So I became a contractor for them while I owned my store, and that was my first foot in the door. And I started writing marketing plans and some sales plans and got involved, and they would fly me out to events, and my first time that I went to Essen was with them, and they flew me to Essen, and I was running events for them and things like that. And then they slowly started asking me to do more and more and more, and they actually had offered me a job. And the first time I turned it down. And I said no. I didn't want to move, and I didn't want to relocate and do all that. And then eventually, actually it was the worst job offer or pitch I ever got. Monica Jones, she was my boss there for quite a while. She called me up and she said, well, here we go again. You're probably going to say no. And she offered me a job, and this job really appealed to me because it was to come in and they were going to totally redo their marketing and sales department, and they were going to start from scratch, and they were two siloed groups, and they wanted to mesh them together. And I always believe that marketing people need to be 50% salespeople, and salespeople need to be 50% marketing people. So this really appealed to me. So I sold my store, and I moved to Norfolk, Virginia. Probably not my favorite place on the planet to live, but I was doing something I really, really loved. And that was my first big break. And it really started because I was doing something in the industry that got some attention, and then they came to me and said, you know, will you dabble? So it wasn't a full-time job, but I kind of was burning the candle at both ends. I was running my store. I was working probably 7 days a week easily. And I started doing some consulting stuff. So, you know, I was busy working my store sometimes. I was up late at night working on stuff. I was traveling for them, but I also had my day-to-day thing. I couldn't make a living from what they were paying me as a consultant. It was nice supplemental income, but my bread and butter was still my day job. So that was the first step, and kind of my first thing that I would emphasize to you is don't be afraid to dabble and kind of burn the candle at both ends. It's probably more realistic that that's the path that you'll take then all of a sudden, instantly, you'll quit your day job and have a full-time gig somewhere. So that brings my next question for you guys. Like, what's your plan? And, you know, I think the first thing is kind of focusing, narrowing it down to what do you want to do? And then the next step is, how are you going to do it? And you're going to come up with a plan, and you should, but you should also realize that your plan's probably going to have to change. So I would say you want to come up with like this kind of multi-pronged plan of like, these are some things that I can do to help open some doors to the next step, and take it step by step. You know, don't necessarily apply for the vice president of marketing job, you know, at the biggest company in our industry. That job's probably going to go to somebody that somebody at that company knows and has a track record in our industry, right? Like, I mean, it's not impossible, but that's probably not your first step. So, there we go. Okay, so I kind of looked back on what opened doors for me and how that process went for me, and I kind of boiled it down to these three things. Like, I had to show that I had a little bit of experience for the next step. I had to show that I was really a hard worker, and I can't emphasize this one enough. In our industry, everybody works with very small teams. Some of the biggest companies out there, you would be surprised how small their team is. So, like I like to describe us at Renegade is that we all work full-time plus. That's what we do. And I mean, honestly, we all work a job and a half. We all work remotely. It's definitely a nice lifestyle environment. We're a virtual company. Everybody's remote. If in the middle of the day somebody needs to go to the doctor or whatever, like nobody's punching a clock. It's definitely a very healthy environment. You can have a life, but we all probably work more hours than we would if we were working a 9-to-5 job for somebody else, but we're doing what we love. So work ethic really does go a long way in our industry. People recognize it. I know talking to my peers at other companies, when we're looking out in kind of the community, that's something that comes up a lot because everybody is doing a lot of work. So, and then network. You want to build your network. You want to start to meet people in the industry. You want to start to become known, because I can tell you every single job that I've had in the industry, I've not applied for it. Every single job that I've had has been somebody actually coming to me and saying, we're interested in you for this job. And, you know, that's not always going to be the case, but it does work. Like, the more you get out there and the relationships that you make with people, we just right now posted 3 positions at Renegade that we're hiring. We had people in mind for every single one of those positions before we posted them. But we made a decision. We said, let's post it because we might be surprised. Maybe somebody that we didn't think would be interested, that they're at some other company or they're even outside of our industry, would be interested in working for us. So let's post it just to see. But even if we didn't post those jobs, we kind of had people in mind that we wanted to approach, because we see people, and some of them currently have jobs, and some of them don't have jobs in our industry. But we've gotten to know them as booth staff, at shows, or as designers that we've worked with, or people that play test for us and things like that. So, they've kind of started in that, almost that contractor level where I started, and they're a known quantity. So your network can be really important. So I kind of want to go through these. So experience. I kind of touched on that. I would say any opportunity in the game industry is a good opportunity. Getting some experience, getting your foot in the door will help you. But it goes beyond just the game industry. And that kind of goes back to my first question of what do you want to do? Today you might be here and say, I really want to design games, but you might be an awesome marketing person in your day job. And you might want to consider taking that and saying, listen, my passion really is game design and this is really fun, but you could be a phenomenal marketing person in the game industry and really be a superstar. Like, don't discount what you do in the real world and doing it in our world, in the game world, because the difference between, I could have wound up working for some consumer products company and marketing or selling toilet paper, and that would absolutely suck. But I really I enjoy marketing games. Like, that's a totally different environment. So think about what you want to do, and then build your experience and your expertise in that area the best you can. Whether it's game design or graphic design or marketing or sales or whatever it is, try to build up your level of experience. And the other thing in our industry that's really, really valuable is expertise from outside of our industry in a lot of these fields is highly sought after to bring into our industry. Because our industry is small and growing, and sometimes we don't have people that have the highest skill set that they could possibly get somewhere else. So a great example is our creative director, Anita. Anita, previously I'd met her working at a company a few years back, and then she went off and she worked at companies like Spin Master as a graphic design lead, and Blizzard. And now Anita works for us as our creative director full-time and manages all of our graphic designers. But that experience that she gained during those years where she was at one of the biggest toy companies in the world and one of the biggest video game companies in the world is invaluable to our industry. And she was able to take that experience back and now apply it in our space. So, as you can imagine, like, that's somebody that you never would think that would actually go through those steps and then come back to our tabletop space. But for her, this is a lifestyle choice where she has more flexibility. She doesn't have to live in an area of the country that she doesn't necessarily want to live in. She's actually spends a decent amount of her time now in Costa Rica, working remotely from Costa Rica because we're virtual. It really doesn't matter. And they can live the lifestyle that they want to live and not have to punch a 9-to-5 clock. But I can tell you right now, Anita works crazy hours. But that's the trade-off, right? Like, she's getting that lifestyle. But that experience that she gained outside of our industry made her extremely attractive inside of our industry. She could have easily gone to a much bigger company than mine and gotten a job there. So experience really goes a long way. So think about, it's another way to put this is kind of like your own personal development and education. How can you increase your worth and your appeal in the industry? So the other thing I touched on is work ethic. Really, this one you would think should be common sense, and it's pretty self-explanatory, but I can't stress enough, everybody works with a very small team, and no matter what small role that you might get as your first break, if it's working booth staff for a publisher at Gen Con or Origins or something like that, they're watching. Like, a lot of times, I can tell you from my personal experience, that's your first audition. And it might not be the job that you want. None of us really aspire to be doing demos for the rest of our lives, at a convention booth. But how you do that speaks to how you will perform in other roles. So showing that, you can do the work, and if you do take on contract work, hit your deadlines, communicate, be on time, do the work that you signed up to do. Don't overcommit if it's something that you can't do. Just to get your foot in the door. Be honest with them and say, this isn't something I don't think I can handle that, or I don't think I can do that work on that schedule. Tell them up front, and they'll respect you a lot more than if at the end, you're going, oh, I missed my date and I need 3 more weeks. Whoop. Hey, what did we get? Oh, network. Okay, this one's really important and really kind of ties the whole thing together. So the more people that you meet, the more opportunities that you're going to have. So attending events like this are great, and getting out and traveling, probably one of the best ways to start your network is to, I wouldn't say volunteer. So like when we do conventions and events, we don't use volunteers. All of our staff is paid. So if you come work for us as a demo person at Gen Con or something, you're actually a contractor and you get paid cash. We don't use volunteers, but that kind of used to be the old school model, right, is volunteers. But, most us and a lot of other companies now have just kind of said, like, we're actually going to make this official and we're going to pay you and you're going to be a contractor. But those are really good opportunities for you guys to get your foot in the door, to start to meet other people. When you're going to industry events, try to break outside of your bubble. A lot of times, like we all go and we kind of hang out with our friends and, do our things and, go to the bars and whatever, but try to break outside your bubble and meet new people. That's how you're gonna meet the person that's gonna offer you your next job. So try to expand and build your network. All right, next one. Okay, so crafting your brand. So you kind of take those 3 things, your education and experience and your work ethic and your network, and now you kind of need to, focus on building your brand. Who are you? Like when somebody talks about you in the industry, what do they think of you? Are you a marketing person? Are you a designer? Are you a graphic designer? Are you a multifaceted, talented person that can do a lot of different things? This is your perception, right? So I used to work for somebody, and she was a great public relations person, and she always used to say, perception is reality, right? So how people perceive you is going to be their reality of the type of person or potential hire you are going to be. So be very conscious of that. We all make personal decisions. Live your life the way you want to live it, but just realize that the image that you're creating is going to be the way people perceive you, and whether or not they think you're a good fit for their team or not. Now with social media, there are no secrets. We all kind of wear our heart on our sleeve, and we have social media, and we post whatever we want. You just kind of have to make those personal decisions of how you're going to represent yourself. I can tell you right now, when we hire people, we look at social media. We want to get to know you. We want to see what type of a person you are. That's not the final decision. It's just one piece of the puzzle. And I think that's pretty common, that's just part of the world now, right? Like, that's where we are. Like, how many people have Facebook friends that they don't really know, right? Yeah, I have like almost 3,000 Facebook friends. I do not know all these people. We don't have a personal relationship where we know each other in that realm of social media and we interact. And then, occasionally you kind of meet each other at an event or something. But, that's a different world. And how many people have had the experience of somebody on social media is a totally different person than when you meet in real life? Right. So, that's fine from one perspective, but when you want to build a career in the game industry, you have to be cognizant that how you're perceived online will be how people might assume that you are in the real world. So make sure those things sync up, and you're putting your kind of your best foot forward. So, all right, what do we have next? Okay, so common mistakes. These are things that I've experienced and things that I've even done. So lying to your employer. And what I mean about this is you really, really, really want to work in game design, but you take a position with a company that you really don't want to do. And then you get in there, and you wind up not doing that job to the best of your ability and spending all your time over with the internal game design guys because you really want to work your way in there. But on the other hand, your employer, your boss over in this part of the company, is very unhappy with you because you're really not interested in doing the job that you were hired to do. And this is probably one of the most common mistakes, and it's very, very tempting, right? Like, you get your foot in the door, you know, you're finally working for a company. It's not really in the role that you want to do, so you kind of don't do it, right? Or you kind of half-ass it, and you try to get into the part of the company that you really want to get into. And I've experienced this firsthand multiple times. And a lot of times it's through like those marketing channels. Somebody gets like a marketing job, and then, you know, we never see them in the marketing department ever again. So, you know, be honest with yourself. Like, is this a job that you really want to do? And maybe you want to grow into something else in the future, and that's totally fine. Like that, again, that was kind of my path. I started off in marketing and sales, and I did that for a period of time. And then when I was at Decipher, after a year or two doing that, I was starting to get more involved in the product side, because marketing people and salespeople, you know, should integrate with that as well and start getting involved in product development. And I had actually introduced into the company positions of brand managers that were meant to kind of bridge the gap between one side and the other. And that eventually evolved into me getting much more involved in product side and having passing off kind of the day-to-day sales and marketing responsibilities to somebody else, and eventually I was running the game studio. And that was something, you know, my skill set and my career kind of evolved to the point then where I had sales and marketing kind of reporting to me, but I had really somebody doing that, and I was really more focused. I had the brand team, and then I had all the game designers, and I had a lead in there that was, you know, kind of running the game design group. And one of the biggest mistakes that happens with internal game designers in almost every company that I've worked in and known of is we wind up taking our best game designer in the company and promoting him to a manager. And it's the dumbest thing ever. But, you know, everybody wants to move up in the world, and they want to get a promotion, they want to make more money, so they wind up being the manager. And then they don't design games anymore, and they just wind up spending a lot of their time managing people and processes. So I was always a big proponent of taking that guy and making him more of a design lead. You know, give him a promotion, give him a raise, but don't make him a manager. Let him design games, because that's what he's really, really good at. But it's hard, because you know, as the companies get bigger, they tend to take on more traditional corporate structures. So, but anyway, you know, kind of getting back to this. You don't want to stray off target. So that's kind of like the last point of this is, you know, kind of keep your eye on the next step. But if you were hired to be a marketing guy, be the best marketing guy you can be and do really good at that. And then once you've got that under control, then kind of like try to break out of that box a little bit and move on to the next thing, because now you've shown that you have a pattern of success. And wow, they're really good. They have a great work ethic. They did some revolutionary things. They improved our processes. They made our marketing group and our creative people actually not hate each other. I used to have like plenty of counseling sessions at one company, like the internal design team and the events people and the marketing people, like were always at each other's throats, and we would kind of get together and, you know, hash it out every 6 weeks or so. But that skill set then leads to your next opportunity, because you'll be recognized and they'll say, look at what a great job they did with that, and now they're kind of bridging the gap, and that can kind of get you into that new space. So, you know, try not to stray off target, focus on what you're doing, and then kind of take it one step at a time. All right. Okay, and then the next step that I experienced, so again, my first opportunity was, you know, major thing was at Decipher. And that company was phenomenal. I really, really enjoyed my time there, and I learned a lot. It was very entrepreneurial. It was a private company. And by the time I had kind of run my course there, I was running basically the whole game business. And we also had two other pieces of the company that most people don't know. There was a fan club piece of the company that ran the Star Trek and Lord of the Rings fan club. And then there was a whole other publishing piece of the company that did magazine and website stuff and all that wasn't really game related. So it was pretty cool. And then after that, I started to get interest from some other companies, right? Like they're like, oh, look, you know, this guy's like doing some interesting stuff over here. Maybe he doesn't want to live on the East Coast anymore. That was absolutely true. So I think I had kind of reached the limit of what I could do there and grow there, and then some other opportunities kind of presented themselves. So I can't stress enough, like, exit gracefully. If you have gotten to a point where, for good or bad, it's time to move on and do something else, or new opportunity, or maybe this just isn't working for you, don't burn bridges. This is a tiny little industry. There's a really good chance that whoever you work with today, you are going to be working with them tomorrow. Not just within our industry, but on the periphery. So most of my career, up until Renegade, I was heavily involved in licensed games. And I cannot tell you how many people I know at least 4 or 5. I've known them throughout their career at like 4 or 5 different video game studios, TV studio, movie studios, production companies, that they are moving through their career as well. And maybe, back in 2002, like, that person and I had a tough time, but it's not personal. Because then in 2012, now that person is the decision maker at another place where I'm, trying to maybe make a game with. So, always exit gracefully, give notice. There was a discussion about this on social media recently about how people are quitting their jobs by just not showing up, right? That's the way they're giving notice. They just stop coming in. Like, it's not gonna do well for you in the long run, right? Like, give your notice, try to have as comfortable and as a transition as you possibly can. Always be available. I could say there's never really a good reason to burn bridges. We all encounter like those people that maybe like we want absolutely positively nothing to do with. And that's a decision. I would say that there are definitely people I would never, ever work with again in the industry. I can't, that doesn't even fill one hand. So, but you just have to realize, like, when you make those decisions, there might be repercussions to them too. So, it has to be a pretty big deal for you to do that. And then really it's repeat the process, right? Like, continue to develop your skill set, continue to do your best at that in that role, and then continue to grow, right? And challenge yourself and kind of build your network and move through. And, so if the majority of you are looking to be game designers, it might take you a few years within the industry to be a in-house game designer somewhere. But then, we'll talk a little bit in a second about, being a freelance game designer, right? Like, that's a totally different type of path. So let's see. All right, so game designers, freelance versus in-house. So who here would like to just be a freelance game designer their entire career? Okay. Anybody that would like to be an in-house game designer? All right. So I can tell you in my experience, companies that do lots of licensed product tend to lean towards having in-house game designers. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. One of them is security. When you're working on Star Wars, there's a lot of information that can't be shared. And you want to have an in-house team that's accountable, that you can trust, and that also builds trust with the licensor. There's also financial reasons. On one hand, there's royalties. When you're paying royalties to a studio and you're also paying royalties to independent designers, it can make a product like not even viable, depending on what it is. But usually the biggest reason is also workflow and continuity. If you have a license, a lot of times you're going to make more than one product for that license. And having a team and investing all the time and energy to have them become experts on that brand and to keep making those products, and also working with the licensor, there's always a relationship kind of curve that happens with a licensor. When you're making something in their world, they have to protect it. And they eventually will usually build trust with those designers that they know how to build a positive experience in that world and that represents their brand and follows the rules and everything else. So a lot of times you wind up with internal teams. You see it at FFG. At Decipher, we had only internal teams. At Upper Deck, it was primarily internal teams to work on those big licenses. It's branching out a little bit more now, but it's definitely a viable option, and there's pros and cons to both. So being on an internal team, you're an employee, you have a regular paycheck, you're most likely getting health insurance. I would say in my experience, most of those designers are making more than they would get as an independent designer, unless their name is Eric Lang, in their salary. So, and it can open up doors for those next steps. I know a couple dozen designers that worked on internal teams that now work in the video game industry, and that was their goal. After spending a decade or so in the tabletop industry working on internal design teams, now these guys are at Riot and Blizzard and EA and Activision, and they're designing video games. So that's actually a viable career path, and that's where you kind of need to decide, like, what do I want to do? Today you might be designing tabletop games, but if designing video games is something that you'd be really interested in, working in an internal design team is probably a good step. I can tell you in the video game world, I have a lot of contacts there, they highly value tabletop game designers, because tabletop game designers have a skill set that not all digital game designers come out of school with or have. Like, right, game design term in the virtual space, in the interactive space, is used very, very broadly. Somebody that writes quests for an MMO generally has the title of game designer. They're not really doing the things that you guys do. So that it's a viable career path. It's something that you'd want to consider. But then freelance, right? Freelance is something totally different. That's what most of you guys are doing, right? Like, how many people here have had one game published and released, not self-published? Okay. How many people here have self-published a game, like through Kickstarter or otherwise? Okay. All right. So that's pretty viable. Like, you can do it. Like, how many people have been pitching games for more than 3 years? Right, a tiny percentage of the room. So when you look at the room here, most of you have been doing this for less than 3 years, and probably about 10 to 15% of you have a game published or have self-published a game. Those are pretty good numbers. I mean, honestly, for less than 3 years worth of pursuing a career, which is probably one of the hardest categories to pursue, right, is game design, because there's a lot of people designing games. Let's see, what do we have next here? Okay, so freelance. So let's talk about some of the different options for freelance designers. How many people have gone to conventions and set up meetings with publishers? Okay, so that's probably the most common way to start getting your foot in the door with publishers, right? So you go in and you have your pitch and your sell sheet, and you pitch it to a studio, and then you never hear back, right? Or you hear back and it's like, sorry, we're not interested, or we're still looking at it, or we're backed up. Like, I know that you'll get that answer from us a lot because we're always totally backed up. And it's kind of frustrating, right? Because then you're just kind of going on to the next thing, and you have to travel to the next show, and this is all money out of your pocket. But that's the path, right? Like, I can tell you right now, I'm much more likely to sign a game from a game designer that I've met in person. That's the best way for me to experience the game, is to sit down and play the game with the designer and kind of go through the process. We get a lot of stuff through email as well, and it's not as good, right? Like, it's not as engaging. I can't play the game with your enthusiasm. A video is okay too. I can get the mechanics of it, and I'm really good at reading rules and kind of getting a feel for a game, but it's never as good as playing the game. So what are some other ways that you guys kind of get out there as freelance designers? What are some of your other options? Sen. Right, so that's a good entry-level way to get your foot in the door with companies, is doing development. Development, I think, is one of the most overlooked areas in our industry. It happens in the card game industry as well, like for trading card games. Everybody wants to be a designer, and those developers are worth their weight in gold. Because traditionally, like in the card game world, the designers come up with a pass and they turn the file over to a team of developers. And a lot of times what you guys see in a Magic card or a Pokemon card or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or anything looks drastically different than what the original pass was from the first designers. It evolves. And it's the same thing we're starting to see more and more in board games, that a good developer can really take a good design and make it into a great game, working collaboratively with that designer, right? Because you guys, like when we're all playing a game or we're designing a game, we're in a little bit of a bubble, right? You kind of get into a feedback loop if your playtest group is small, or you always play with the same people and you get into a little bit of bubble. And then you give it to a developer and the developer has a totally fresh take on it and makes you mad. Because, right? Who has sent off their game to a friend or a playtest group and had them come back with feedback that was totally contrary to what you were trying to achieve? Right. And sometimes they are wrong, right? They didn't get it. Maybe you weren't communicating to them what you were trying to accomplish. Other times, they might be right. Maybe there was something that you guys missed that was a different direction that you could go that would take that game in another direction. So it's a little bit of a tangent, but a developer, I think, is probably one of those other growth areas that companies like mine are looking for people that have that skill set where they can go in and take somebody else's design and not play test it, but take it and give suggestions on how to improve it in different directions that you can go. And not every suggestion is going to be right, but they can see other possibilities. And that skill set, I think, is going to continue to develop, and that role in our industry is going to continue to develop. So that's a good way to kind of get your foot in the door and start building a relationship and building your network, like with some of those companies like mine and many, many others. But it's a different skill set. I would say you probably need to practice that. Like work with friends of yours that are designers and take their games, play them without them. Don't play them with the designer. Play them on your own with a different group of people and look at it objectively and say, how can we make this better? What else could we do with this that's different? And don't be afraid to break away from what they were trying to do and go in a different direction. It's a good mental exercise at the absolute least and can kind of develop your skill set as a developer. So let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, so these are some things that we touched on, right? As a freelance designer, you kind of need to get out there and travel, or at least show up at these events where guys like me travel to, and we can meet. You need to build relationships, and sometimes that might be as a designer, as a developer, as an editor, but start building relationships with publishers. A lot of us that are, small to medium size, think about it. We decided to go into this industry and do what we do because we really love it, and we want to work with people that we get along with and like. So if we get to know you and know that you're a nice person and we like you, that's part of the equation that we would want to work with you. So it definitely just goes a long way to build relationships. But then some of the things, you guys need to be bookkeepers. So when you start to get your games published, you're going to get royalty reports and royalty checks, and you're going to have to file taxes and do all that stuff. So you're going to basically start running your small business. You're going to need to be a project manager. We work with a lot of freelance designers, and our internal person, Alicia, is our operations person, and she will give you milestone dates. And if you miss your milestone dates, Alicia's not fun. She does her job very, very well, and she will motivate you. So she wants you, and it's in your best interest, she wants you to hit your dates because we're trying to get your game out at Gen Con. And there's nothing worse than we have a launch planned for your game and it gets bumped on the schedule and, now it's going to come out in November at Thanksgiving. Ugh, it's like the worst time. So you need to kind of be your own little project manager as well. You need to be a salesperson, right? You're selling yourself and you're selling your games. So those are some skills that you might want to practice a little bit. Practice your pitches. You need to try to be able to explain your game in 30 to 60 seconds. I can't tell you how many pitches sometimes where if I don't interrupt and just start asking questions, if I just let the designer go for 20 minutes, I would have no idea what the game was about because they really haven't taken what they're trying to do and worked out a way to really articulate it and explain it that somebody that hasn't played it would understand. So you have to remember, you're really close to it. You guys get it. It came from your brain. I don't have any insight into what you're thinking, so you need to explain it in a way that somebody that doesn't know what you're talking about can get it, and you need to kind of hook me in and kind of, for me, I need to kind of go through the journey with you of like what is the experience that we're gonna go through as we play that game. So like when you're doing your pitch, it's very much an emotional like kind of hook thing. You have to remember, like especially if you're meeting publishers at big events like Gen Con and everything else, we're sitting through a lot of these meetings, and it's really not fair, but by day 3 of the event, we've sat through a lot of pitches, and everything starts to kind of blend together after a certain amount of time. Like everybody's tired, and we've heard a lot of pitches and everything else. So your game needs to stand out and be special, and sometimes it takes a little bit of salesmanship to do that. You're going to have to be a little bit of an editor. I touched on this earlier, but game designers are the worst people to write their own rule books, but you're going to have to give it the first pass because then somebody else is going to have to kind of finish up that process and take it home with your collaboration. But the better that you can do on that first initial pass or kind of wrap your rules, we have what we call a rules lock date, where we give designers, like they can keep iterating and tweaking stuff up until that date. At that point, we're done. If we can't lock your rules by that date, the whole schedule changes because we can't complete art and we can't tell the graphic designer to do everything because if not, we wind up redoing work 2 and 3 times. And then, right, the costs on your product go crazy and graphic designers are doing 3 times the amount of work and artists are getting mad at us or we're losing our opportunity for the artists to even work on the game because they're contracted to do something else, after our window. So the best that you can do to kind of clean your rules and have it be clear and concise in what you want, and I perfectly understand that as creatives, you hate to ever turn it over because there's always something that you can keep doing with it, but at some point, you've got to let it leave the nest, right? And it's just got to go and we've got to take it to the next step. And editing really, that mindset and that skill set, I think helps that process. And really to kind of like wrap that little list up, as a freelance designer, you are a small business person. You are going to be running a small business. You have to wear many hats like most of us do, and kind of all these things will come into play throughout your career. And these are all good problems to have, but keep in mind that if any of these things are something that maybe is not your forte, it's okay to bring in help, right? Like, I would never tell people to do their own taxes. Like, it's worth it to have somebody do your taxes for you. Like, it's your money. Make sure that you're only giving away as much of it as you have to. And I guess that's very American of me to say. So, but all these things, like even salesperson, it's become really common now for people to co-design, and I think that co-design relationship is really valuable because you have on so many different levels, right? From a creative level, you have 2 minds kind of collaborating, and sometimes I've noticed, my observation has been that sometimes these pairs tend to be a little bit more designer-developer, kind of skill sets, and I think that's really, really interesting and valuable. So sometimes it might be that you want to pair up with somebody and have that collaboration, and that person might be really good at pitching your game, and then the other person might be really good at that kind of defining those rules and the nuts and bolts of the game, and that's a really good team, right? Like, that's a good marriage. So, look at this, be honest with yourself, what are your strengths and weaknesses, and then try to kind of build from there and find people that can help shore up those things that maybe you're not the best at. All right, so in-house game designer, I kind of touched on this already. This is definitely something that I think you're going to see more and more of as companies continue to grow. We're kind of starting to move a little bit in that direction. Renegade, we just did Scott Pilgrim. We're going to start to do some other licenses, nothing like I've done on the level in the past, but a little bit more, and that need for people that are really focused on a specific brand for a prolonged length of time is becoming more prevalent. And it makes licensors much more comfortable. When I can say it's somebody in-house that, yes, they can have all the secret information that's not been released to the public, and it's not somebody, you know, that is a contractor. That word makes big licensors really, really nervous. Because there's not a lot of accountability. So it's something to keep in mind. And like I said, if your goal is to have a little bit more security or maybe move on beyond tabletop in the future, it's a pretty viable alternative. So these are some things. They are extremely rare. There's not as many people doing it. It was definitely much more prevalent during the collectible card game era in the 90s and early 2000s, where everybody pretty much had internal design teams. But it is on the rise again. I'm seeing it more and more again. You know, usually works on licensed or established franchises. It is kind of a unique skill set in the sense that you are working and playing in somebody else's sandbox, right? Like you're not creating this world or thing from scratch. You have to take somebody else's creation and then translate it into a game experience that resonates with the fans of that property or franchise. And that's not everybody really wants to do that. It can feel restrictive at times, right? Where somebody says, you're going to make a game based on Lord of the Rings. Well, awesome, I love Lord of the Rings. But if Lord of the Rings really isn't my thing, that might be hard for me to wrap my head around. And some of the best designers in the world in licensed space that I've ever worked with can build and create a phenomenal game experience for a brand that they absolutely hate. They can immerse themselves in that world, they can get into it, they can figure out what makes a fan of that world really love the world and build a phenomenal game, but they personally have no love for that at all. It's not what they watch, not what they're into. When you've had to watch 200 episodes of Mega Man, and like I've done, and then build a game for it, you start to appreciate that skill set. So, but that's your thing. If you can immerse yourself in somebody else's creation and become a fan of it, like that's kind of me. Like, I watched 2 seasons of Vampire Diaries. It's not my favorite show, but I watched it, and then we signed the license, and previous company was that we made trading cards out of it. But that was part of my job, is to evaluate licenses, and the only way I can evaluate those licenses and see if they have what the qualities that we need to make the type of product that we want to make out of it is I have to immerse myself in it. So back in my really heavy license days, that's all I would do. Not all I would do, but I was constantly reading books and watching TV shows and movies of things that normally I wouldn't normally spend my time doing. And as a game designer in that space, you're going to find yourself kind of facing the same thing. You're not going to have to do all the evaluation, but somebody's going to come to you and say, you know, we're making a My Little Pony game. I need you to watch all 300 episodes of My Little Pony and then tell me what's going to make a fun game. So, yeah, and then, you know, ultimately you're designing for others. You're not designing for yourself. And I think most of us get into this industry no matter which area, is we're kind of doing it for ourselves. Because at the start of all this, we're passionate about this because we're fans ourselves. Like, we love games, and we want to play games, and that's why we want this to be our career, and we don't want to work, you know, somewhere else in the world. We want to do this. So in the licensed world or the internal designer world, you're going to wind up kind of working in somebody else's sandbox a little bit. So you have to kind of reconcile if that's right for you or not. All right, what's next? But ultimately, as an independent designer, or honestly, like, you're going to wind up, you know, being able to be your own boss. Even working at another company, I can't tell you how most of the companies in our industry are very entrepreneurial. It's a different environment. I really know very few game companies in our industry that are super, super corporate. Even the ones that appear on the outside to be corporate, it's a much different environment. You're going to have a lot of autonomy. You're going to have a lot of freedom, and you're going to work with like-minded people. So it really is a special experience when, you know, even the person that's a salesperson in your company is also a gamer, right? Like, everything just kind of fires on all cylinders, and it becomes a much healthier experience. And in essence, even if you're not like doing your own thing and you're not running your own company, you're going to have much more of that feeling of independence and being part of something that everybody's kind of moving in the same direction. So it's definitely a goal that I would encourage you to pursue. If this is your dream to work in the game industry, absolutely pursue it. It's worth pursuing. So, at the end of the day, any of those things are viable to either do for a company or freelance, every single one of them. If you have anything on that original list, on that skill set, artist, finance, that's another area, right? There's lots of small companies in our industry, and maybe you went to school and, you studied accounting. That's a great way for you to get into the industry. There's lots of small companies, lots of guys on Kickstarter and stuff that need help. So need some professional advice. And then the last one is publisher. So maybe you want to be a game publisher. If all of this stuff, like kind of wearing all these hats and dabbling in all this stuff and maybe working with other people, being a game publisher might be the thing for you. And that's kind of what I decided, right? So I kind of went through my career, and after Decipher, I had a choice between a company in Seattle and a company in San Diego. And I really wanted to live in San Diego. So I wound up taking a job at Upper Deck, and I was up at Upper Deck. And my career path there at Upper Deck kind of followed a similar path. I wound up coming in. My first assignment was to work on the Versus system game on the Marvel game and kind of right the ship. So the game was not appealing to hardcore comic book fans. It was really only appealing to hardcore gamers. And the comic book fans were finding the game too difficult. And I worked with R&D over a year or two to kind of get the game to be more accessible to comic book fans, right? Like, you were punished in that game. If you built a Captain America deck because Captain America was your favorite player, it was probably not viable in almost any tournament format that you played in. And we needed to fix that. And then I took that, and then it kind of moved on, and eventually I wound up running the game group there, and that was a great experience. I got to work with big licensors like Konami on Yu-Gi-Oh! And Blizzard and World of Warcraft and everything else. And then I took the first step, and when I had left Upper Deck, I started another company, and there was me and 3 partners, and we all founded Cryptozoic Entertainment. And that was really an extension of what I had done in my career all the way up to that point. Blizzard wanted the World of Warcraft trading card game to continue, and I was able to basically leave the company and my other partners, and Blizzard really helped facilitate the creation of our company. And, it was a horrible thing. Is one of my last things that I did at Upper Deck was we had to lay off a bunch of people because a bunch of licenses went away. But then the great thing is I could take that World of Warcraft trading card game team, and we rehired them instantly, and then they continued to do the thing that they were doing. And then we made a lot of licensed games. And up to that point, I had done so much work in licensed games that I decided that I wanted to play in a different sandbox. So I left my partners and sold off my piece of the company, and then I started Renegade. And I said, well, I want to be a different type of publisher. I want to publish games from people like you guys. Because doing licensed games is really fun, right? It's interesting. Who doesn't want to make games based on like the Lord of the Rings and Mega Man and World of Warcraft, and all that stuff was really fun, and I learned a lot from it. But at the end of the day, you're still playing in their sandbox, and you're playing by those rules. Now, working with designers like you guys, we make the rules, right? Literally make the rules, but we can do whatever we want. And that's one of the greatest freedoms that you guys have as, aspiring, full-time game designers, is the sky's the limit. The next Dominion might come out of this room, the next something that we don't even know. Like back in the early 2000s, Jordan Weissman came up with the idea for pre-painted collectible miniatures, with Mage Knight, and that created a whole new category in the industry. Like that wasn't a thing that we made in this industry until that product came out. And that wasn't just a one-off game. That's a whole category now. And same thing with Dominion. Dominion came out, and it was a different way to play a game. And now it's a whole category. How many deck builders have been out since Dominion? I mean, I don't think we even know anymore, like at least 50 or 100 deck builders. That's a whole category, and that was created by a game designer. It wasn't created by a marketing group or a sales group or some corporate board that said what's going to be the most marketable product that we can sell and how many widgets can we sell to, you know, a bunch of people at home and get them to buy toilet paper. Like that came from a creative process. So you guys have a lot of power, and the sky's the limit, really. So, you know, keep pursuing it, and I think that, well, I don't know. Let's see if this thing... Oh, yeah. So just in closing, it kind of wraps up, you know, experience, work ethic, and network, and then continue to grow, transition gracefully when you move on to your next opportunity, and repeat the process. And, you know, and that's how you build a career, right? And that's what I want to get you guys, like, if you get anything from this, it's not about getting a job. It's about how do you build your career, and where are you going to be in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and just, you know, realize that it might take some time and effort to get there. It might not just happen overnight. So, you know, think it out, come up with a plan, and then be flexible, because you're going to change your plan as things change and new opportunities present themselves. So, all right, now I think that's it. Okay, so literally you can ask me anything. There is no question that is probably too much. If I really, really, really can't answer the question, I'll tell you, but I can probably come up with something. So questions about publishing, career stuff?
So you spoke a lot about designers and developers.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on the difference between the two, you know, fields?
Yeah, so like in my experience, so growing up kind of in the trading card industry, right, that's where I got started. A designer in that space, like what I would call, like, would come up with an engine, right? So would come up with something that hadn't been done before. Like, so I kind of lament a lot that trading card games now have kind of almost taken a huge step backwards recently. They're all magic derivatives. Like, that's pretty much what you're seeing. Back in the 90s, it was the Wild West. Like, there was so much innovation going on in that space, people coming up with new engines and new ways to take cards. Yeah, it was not always a 2v2 or 1v1 experience, but, you know, most of the time it was a versus type of experience where, you know, I'm sitting across the table from somebody. But the things that we were doing with the cards and the way that the mechanics and the engines worked were so different. And it's really interesting that in the last, you know, 5-10 years, everything's become very magic derivative. Everything is play a thing, play a resource, have the things attack. So a designer in that space was somebody coming up with a brand new engine, a new way to use that category and have those cards interact. A developer was somebody that would then take that and take the initial design of cards and iterate on it and get it working. And like the card game space, if you want to just as an exercise to exercise your design skills, designing card games are, in my opinion, one of the most difficult things to design, because every time you design new content, you not only have to design new content that works within that new set, but you have to design new content that works with, you know, anywhere from 300 to 3,000 other game pieces. So you're constantly working forwards and backwards, and that's why, you know, rotation became a thing. Honestly, because designers were it can't be managed, and it was too cumbersome. But for a long time, I mean, at Decipher, we had, we kind of had this horrible policy that we would never ban a card, and we would never do rotation. And you know, this came about in the early days of trading card games because. Honestly, our competitors were doing that. So our CEO at the time said, we're going to be different, and we're never going to tell players that their cards aren't usable anymore. So we're never going to do rotation. And all of our game designers internally were very, very sad. So, but yeah, so the board game space, I think that, again, like somebody coming up with mechanisms and the basics of the game and the interactions and the gameplay and pretty close to it, but then a developer can help take it home, right? And offer a different perspective. And sometimes it's stress testing the game and seeing like, what breaks and what doesn't break. And then also seeing like if there's new directions to kind of push the envelope and just giving you another perspective. So I don't think, and I think it's different for every designer-developer, relationship. Some designers maybe go a little further, and then they're a developer that they work with, presses different buttons. And I know some designers that I've worked with, especially like some old school folks, they like to do something really bare bones, and then they're fine if somebody takes it and really fleshes it out. And I would say it's, in a lot of cases, it's more of a co-design, but so, okay.
You had it in your list of skills that independent designers have to have, but I didn't see it up there on the big list of jobs that go into game industry.
Yeah.
And that's project management.
Yeah, so project management, is definitely a needed role in our industry. I think that probably, again, every company is small, so that's probably one of the things that a lot of smaller companies just kind of do without. And when we did without for the first 2.5 years of Renegade, I did everything the first year. It was me and my wife, Robin. So that was the deal. I'll do everything else. You please do the books because I don't want to do that. So I did everything. Worked with the factories, did all the sales, did all the marketing, worked with the graphic designers, did the art direction. So everything that came out like in those really almost the first 3 years, and then I hired Sarah about 18 months in. She was employee number 1, and then she took all the sales and marketing off my plate, and then I continued to do everything else. And project management was certainly not my strong suit. I'm very much well, we didn't get that done, so I guess now we'll just release it in a different month. And when the catalog was really small, in the first year we only released maybe 4 or 5 games, that's not so bad. Now that our catalog is much bigger, the domino effect of one of those things going wrong can really hurt all the games and hurt the company. So we brought in Leisha. Leisha, this is another good example. So I've known her for a decade, and she has project management experience, about 15 years project management experience working on, huge brands. And now she wanted to move back to the country in upstate New York, close to her family, live a different lifestyle. This is win-win. She gets to live the lifestyle that she wants to live, and we get somebody that is extremely experienced. So yes, if you have project management skills, shop those around, because people that don't even know they need them, need them. So, any other questions? Yeah?
Just about the sales speech, you said, like it's important. So, and you said when we meet you at Comic-Con, you've seen like 3 days, a couple hundred. So the best sales pitch starts with the story, because that's really the passion. Then into the rules, and then why to choose, more or less, you think? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, because I think everybody's a little different. For me, personally, one of my first questions that I ever ask is, what's the objective of this game? What are we trying to do? Because a lot of times people start explaining rules to me of like, you do this and you do this, and I'm like, I have no context. Why are we doing all these things? Like, what's the end goal? Like, what's the win condition, right? And now I have some context. So whether it comes in a story format, I like story personally, but I've done it enough where I don't need that. I don't need a fancy prototype. So the Clank prototype, so those guys that design Clank, they're a very experienced design group. They do digital now, but a lot of the people in that studio were tabletop designers. And this is a good example of like not the greatest pitch, but still being able to like kind of see through it. And so first of all, on our website, it listed types of games not to pitch us, and one of them was deck builders. But I had a previous relationship with these guys, and they do our digital development. They did the digital lanterns, and they do our app with all our accessories for our games and stuff. So they called me up and said, like, let's do a board game. And I said, awesome. And they said, we'll send you a prototype. I said, oh, and rules. I said, okay. And it was literally a hand-drawn board in like colored pencil and crayon, and all the cards were just, like paper and sleeves. So, like, it's totally fine, but, it wasn't like the most polished presentation. And I sat down and I played a 4-player game by myself, I had no pitch. It was literally just rules and a bunch of cards and a board and some meeples and stuff, and I just kind of had to figure it out for myself. But that was an anomaly because I knew them and they sent me the game and I had time, right? Like I probably invested like 4 hours in figuring that game out. And if that would have been a Gen Con experience, that game may have not gotten made. If somebody just dumped that off at the booth that I didn't know and I just kind of had to figure out, it would have wound up in a pile somewhere and I eventually would have gotten to it, maybe, right? So.
Hi, I'm wondering about, so we've talked about sometimes designers are kind of different than publishers or not good at presenting.
Sure.
What would be your opinion on getting sort of like an agent or a go-between or anyone to help you navigate that world?
I don't know if it's necessary. I think that our industry is really a pretty open and friendly industry for the most part. Like if you need help, I think that there's generally people to give you help and advice and things like that. I honestly don't know any game design agents in the tabletop space. Now, it's more common on the mass market side, okay. Where people are helping represent, designers and stuff to guys like Spin Master and Hasbro and things like that. I don't know if that's entirely necessary, but it's kind of an old school model. It really is a toy industry model for toy inventors. I've heard inklings of our industry of some people trying to help do that. Like I'll introduce you this person or that person or whatever. My advice, but I don't know if I were you, if I'd want to give up a piece of your royalties for that without at least trying first to just see if somebody would be willing to help you because, most people in this industry are pretty friendly. There's very little information that's really, truly closed off, the event is a perfect example. You can come here and just, ask whatever you want to ask and get to meet people, so. But I wouldn't say not to do it. It just probably wouldn't be my first choice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So this kind of touches on that other guy's question. You want us to tell you exactly what the game is, what the target of the game is? What if you're scenario driven? So here's the game mechanics, but like an intro scenario has this objective, but the scenario book might have 10 scenarios in it or 12 different ways to play the game, right?
Right. I think that's okay. I mean, you have to customize your pitch to what the game is and what the game experience is. I mean, most pitch meetings, you're going to have 30 minutes, so it's not like you don't have that much time. But, it's the, just what's the gist of the game? It's kind of cliche, but the most common question is what's fun about this game? Where's the fun in this game? What's the engagement? What's the fun experience? Having more scenarios that you can play through is kind of like a feature set, right? It's but if the first scenario is not fun, the rest of the scenarios don't matter. So, how do you hook me in and then tell me about all that other cool stuff that we get to do too? But, every game's different. So there's no one way to pitch it.
To touch on that too, would you link the scenarios, starting out, small and easy to teach, and then have a campaign, or would you do? They're all separate.
Oh, I don't know. It's hard. I don't know the game, so it depends. I mean, what are you trying to accomplish?
Or a little bit of both, 5 scenario campaign, and then extra scenarios to just add on to it. I guess. Yeah,
it's possible. I don't know. It's hard for me to say without knowing the game and
because it's hard to give these key points for my game because people go, well, how long does it take to play? Well, it depends what scenario you're playing.
Sure. Oh, you want to just try to boil it down to some sort of average, right? Any given session would be X. You could have a satisfactory experience in X amount of time. Whether that's 30 minutes or 3 days. I don't know.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Hello.
Hi.
How did you come up with the name Renegade Games, and does it represent a certain philosophy about the types of games that you choose to publish?
A little bit. So coming up with a name is really, really hard. There's so many, so right, coming from a marketing background, some of the things that I was thinking about was like, where am I going to show up in a distributor catalog, right? Like it's in alphabetical order. Oh, R, I'm going to be towards the back. Am I okay with that? How is the logo going to look? You know, how is the branding going to look? How's it going to look on packaging? I mean, there's so many moving pieces. So we went through so many names but yeah, part of it is also that we wanted it to kind of convey that we're not restrained by any rules. So if you went by what we did as a company the first year, every single pitch that I sat in after the first year or so, year and a half, pitch that I sat in, or interview or podcast or whatever that I did, everybody would say, "Oh yeah, Renegade makes gateway games," and I was like, "No, we make games." And they'd go, "No, you guys make light games." I'm like, "So far, like we make games." Like, or designers would come up to me and go, "Oh, here's some games that you would like." I'm like, "Well, what else have you got over there?" And they're like, "No, these are the games for you." I'm like, "No, they're not." Like, what else have you got? And like, "Well, no, these are the games for Renegade." And I'm like, "Ugh, you're driving me crazy." So, like, if you didn't hear from Gen Con, we're doing an RPG, and we're creating a whole game world, and we're launching it with an RPG. 2 years ago, nobody would have ever thought that we were going to do an RPG. We're doing games with miniatures very soon. We're doing all sorts of stuff. We have some iOS games. So, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, like, that was definitely part of the feeling, is that, like, don't stick us in a box. We'll make whatever we want to make, but yeah. So, but it doesn't have any like weird hidden meaning or anything. And honestly, it's like as much of a branding thing of like, how is it going to look on a box? It was a definitely consideration.
Yeah, I guess that leads into the next part of my question. As designers who are self-publishing multiple titles, does it get more and more important to position your brand as a whole in the marketplace?
Yeah, so I think so. So one of the things I didn't touch on, like about building your brand, is I do think that one of the fine lines that you have to walk is your brand versus self-promotion. If you look at Chris's game at Lanterns, right? So, we did that with Randy at Foxtrot. There's neither Foxtrot or Renegade's logo is on the front of that box. And that was a conscious decision. They're on the sides and they're on the back, but when you looked at Beth Sobel's art on the front of the box, look at that game the next time you see it. Down in the lower right-hand corner, there's a little space where there's not a lantern in the art, and that was a space that she left for a logo. And then when we teamed up with Randy to kind of co-publish that with him, we went through the thing of like, well, do we put both logos on the box? And we're like, that looks horrible. Like the art's so beautiful, and this really doesn't look very good. And then we're like, well, there's a space for a logo, and not even getting into like, neither one of us have like really an ego about this stuff. We're like, it doesn't look good with any logo on the front of the box. It just looks junky. And now Anita, our creative director, who's all about branding, she wasn't with me at the time, but this would give her a conniption, right? She's like, are you crazy? Like, you're not going to put your logo on the front of the box? And we made the conscious decision that selling the game was more important than our brand. And ultimately, if the game looks the best it could possibly look on the shelf and people buy it, they will learn where it came from. So, building your brand is really, really important, but not at the expense of self-promotion. And ultimately, I think that if you're self-publishing your games, I know this is hard to hear as creatives because we all want recognition, but your game is the star. Like, make your game the star and make your game as well known as possible, and the rest will take care of itself. Like, honestly, because if you're gonna grow in such a big way, like, let's face it, like the hobby industry is as big as it's getting, and it's still a niche. And if your game really explodes and breaks out of the hobby, mom or dad or little Bobby that buy your game in Target, they don't really look and see who designed the game. And at the end of the game, you guys really shouldn't care because your stuff just got out there anyway, and more people are enjoying it. And the people that are super passionate about our hobby, they'll get to know your name. So my opinion on branding is that always the game should be the primary focus, and then anything else is secondary to that. And if your game, if the game gets out there, that'll bust down the doors, and then people will know who you are, right? So.
Hi, just a question here.
Hi.
So as a publisher, when you're getting games pitched to you, do you think of them in terms of categories? So let's say you've got your year run ahead of you, and you're thinking, oh, we need a game A class, B class, C class. And then for a designer pitching to you, would you suggest that they ask you about that sort of thing to say, hey, are you looking for a game of this type, or are you looking for a game that's a bit more like this, or is there some sort of classification for the type of games you're looking for?
So kind of yes and no. I would never turn down, something that's just really, really cool and different, just because, we already have, a deck builder, that we're making. Like right now we make a pretty good deck builder that's doing really well. But if somebody came up to me and had something else that was really different and innovative in that space, I wouldn't say, I don't want to do it because I already have Clank. But then on the other hand, there are times where I'm looking at our lineup in the future and saying like, well, I don't really want to do another game with a lot of injection molded miniatures. And that's more of a capacity issue on our end, where it would be, I've already got 3 of those in the works. That's the max that our system, our organization can handle at any given time. And if I add another one in there, I'm going to break the system, or I've got to push it out to such a date that it wouldn't be fair to the designer. I'm usually really honest with designers too. If I say, listen, I really like your game, but it wouldn't be coming out until 2019. And if that doesn't work for you, I totally understand that, you want to try to pursue something else, because I only think that's fair. So to answer your question, it's kind of yes and no. I never actively go into a bunch of pitch meetings saying I'm only looking for this. But, there's just a lot of pieces to the puzzle. So, and as far as games like A, B, and C, I don't know if you meant like A quality, B quality, C quality.
I just meant in terms of category.
Oh, okay, yeah, categories, that's fine. But as far as nobody in this industry is looking for a B game, right? And that's kind of our philosophy too, is that every game that we launch, we want to give it the best opportunity and the best marketing and sales push and everything that we can possibly do to make it an evergreen. That's always the goal. We don't want to ever get in the situation where our catalog is so big that we can't give everything the focus that we want to give it. Like, about the size that we're at now is probably as big as we'll ever get, so.
So this is a bit of a newbie question. In terms of design, you mentioned getting into meetings with publishers and stuff like that, like at Gen Cons or different conventions. How do you get a meeting with publishers such as yourself or other?
So sometimes we actually put out an open call. 2 years ago at Gen Con, I posted a link to a meeting management scheduler thing and just said, if you'd like to schedule a pitch meeting with me, here's the link, and go. And I had pitch meetings from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Thursday, Friday, Saturday of Gen Con for 3 days straight, every 30 minutes. And it was pretty brutal, honestly. It's just a lot of time sitting in a little room. But we wanted to give the opportunity to just meet lots of new designers, even if we weren't signing a game from you then. Now we've made a connection, and you know how to get in touch with me and that sort of thing. So that's one way. Another way is, again, it's just networking. I've had other designers introduce me to their friends. So King Klenko, right? We did Fuse with him and Flatline and Flip Ships most recently. I was at a speed dating event at Gen Con in 2014, and Corey, the designer of Gravwell, Kane wasn't there pitching anything. He was just kind of in the room hanging out. And Corey said, you really need to meet Kane. I think he's got some stuff that you'd be interested in. That's how he connected with me. And now we've done counting unpublished games, like we're probably going to have like 5 games by Kane, and then, you know, within a 4-year period of time. So it's networking, honestly, attending things like this. Now we know each other. So.
Hi.
Hi.
So going back to your question, or the question over here about your honesty saying this, I can't do the game for you during a pitch or something.
Yeah.
For the most part, if you're looking at a game you really like, you say, I can't do it till 2020 or something, would you suggest other companies to go talk to if you say this isn't our type of game, but go check out?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to know exactly what they're thinking as well.
Right.
You know, I think this is kind of a little bit in conflict with what I said earlier. You know, you can look at other companies and kind of see the type of stuff that they're doing to know if at least maybe it's within their wheelhouse, right? Like, I think in a broad sense, you know, companies that aren't making miniatures games at all, doesn't mean that they won't, but your odds are probably less, you know, so if you have a big box miniatures game that's going to have like 200 figures in it, that might not be your first stop. Unless it's Renegade, then you should just show us everything, so it's fine.
So I came in partway through your presentation. If you've already answered this question, let me know, but
it's okay.
If a new designer that is untested in the industry, you know, first game, first signing, what should they expect as far as a contract with a publisher for their first game out of the gate? Or is it you know, a flat amount plus royalties? Is it mostly just royalties? What kind of dollar figures? I mean, every game is different, obviously, but what's a ballpark? You know?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So everybody's royalties are kind of in the same ballpark, but a little different. I would say the industry average for new designers is in the 5 to 8% range. Industry as a whole is probably in that 5 to 10% range. What we do personally, I think, is maybe a little different than average for some things. And this really speaks to my background in licensing. So when I go and license a big brand from a studio, I have to commit to a minimum guarantee of royalties that I am going to pay them. And I kind of took that practice, and our design contracts usually will tell you we're guaranteeing X dollars of royalties over 3 years or 2 years or whatever it is. That's really just from our end, like a show of good faith, and that number is generally based on our initial print run. So, you know, in some ways I'm kind of putting our money where our mouth is and saying, like, listen, why would I sign your game if I don't think I can at least sell 5,000 copies of it? And that's actually our minimum benchmark. If we can't sell 5,000 copies of a game, like, we shouldn't be publishing it. And a lot of times, like, we'll put in there, you know, guaranteed X dollars in royalties over, you know, X period of time, and that's my formula is generally equal to the first minimum print run sort of a thing. Other things that you should look for in your contracts, honestly, you should have some sort of reversion clause in there if you're doing a license. Our reversion clauses are usually contingent on business things happening that are beyond your control, and it's really to protect the designer. So if a company goes bankrupt, you do not want your license to get caught up in bankruptcy proceedings. This is very common in the licensing studio world. As soon as a company goes bankrupt or goes out of business, all contracts revert because they don't want their big movie brand to get tied up. They also do this to protect themselves from acquisitions. So if big studio A licenses their brand to this company and that company gets bought by a competitor, they don't want a competitor to actually have their licensed product. So if a company gets acquired and that legal entity gets dissolved, usually those rights revert back. So basic things like that. On the other hand, we often want the rights to your game forever, as long as we're doing a good job. So as long as again, if we don't pay you your royalties and it's not cured within, you know, like a typical cure period's like 30 to 60 days, if somebody's late or check gets lost in the mail or something, But if we're not paying you your royalties, we're not honoring our contract, we become not a business anymore, you should get your game back. We also usually put in minimum print. If a game gets to a point where it's just not, we're not printing X copies a year, your game goes back to you. Because honestly, at that point, like, what are we doing with it anyway? But on the flip side, if we've put all this time and effort and energy into building your game into a massive success, I don't want 3 years to come around and you to go like, sorry, I'm taking it back. Like, I don't think that's fair either. So we try to be very fair. I think these are reasonable expectations on both sides. Like, I'm very much a proponent of creator rights. You know, you guys, you made the game, it's your baby, and we always see things as a partnership, and I do think that's pretty common in our industry. I really don't know, you know, no companies really come to mind that are predatory, that are looking to like take your thing and not give you, you know, a fair shake. So, but if you have other like contract type questions, I'm not a lawyer, but I've probably done 300 licensing contracts in my career, so I can give you layman's advice.
Oh,
yeah.
I just want to know more thing about networking. I mean, we are all very green, and
yeah.
How do we get to know different kind of people in the industry, like the game developer?
Yeah.
And you know, the game universe is pretty huge, right?
Yeah.
And that's the gateway games, or the games for the non-gamers, and the games for the heavy gamers. And how do we build our network to know different kind of people in this industry too? I mean, how do you start?
So I would say one of the best networking events that you can attend is the publisher speed datings that run at conventions like Origins and Gen Con. Gen Con's a little tougher because we're all so busy, but that's your opportunity, even though it's like for 6 minutes, is that, you know, a publisher will come up to you and you'll get to meet them face to face and get their business card and at least make that initial connection. And it is an investment. I mean, I understand it's expensive to go to these conventions and to travel, but you'll meet 15 publishers in a couple hours span of time. And if you don't know anybody, that's probably one of the best ways to do it. The other ones are events like this, going to like the Unpub events and things like that. There's usually a bunch of us there. So don't like go out, you know, drinking in bars, like that sort of thing. Yeah, so. Yeah, I mean, publishers are pretty, like, go to BGG and just, you know, go to BGG, you know the tab where it shows the hot list? Yeah. Click on company, and you can see a bunch of companies that are very active in the industry, you know, like the top, whatever that list is, 30 or 40 companies. So.
You brought up during the contracts sort of the process, you know, and you know, all the effort you put in. How much creative control do you allow the designers during the development process?
So, I mean, I would say every company's different. I can only really speak to what we do. The way I always present it is that we will be as collaborative as you want to be. So, like I was talking earlier to some people that we use something called Slack. And in Slack, every single game project has its own private channel. And in our Renegade Prime Slack, that one has the game designer, the artist, the graphic designer, marketing, sales, the producer, developer, creative director. The whole team is in there, and everybody's involved. I've let game designers art direct the art for their packaging. Actually, Kane Klenko is a really good art director. Kane does a good job art directing, and he directed the art actually for every one of his games that he did with us. He showed me what he did in the past, and I said, okay, that sounds good. So for us personally, we'll be very, very collaborative. Like, you're kind of as involved as you want to be. 99% of the time, the designers want to get involved. We've worked with some designers that they're like, ugh, don't bother me. Like, you've got my thing, go do your thing. I'm busy over here. I'll check in occasionally, show me stuff, and, you know, we have, you know, but that's pretty rare. So now, there are times where we have to say no, you know, where some game designers say, like, we really want this, and we really want that, and we have to say, you know, we can't do that, and here's why, or that's not the best decision, because here's why, because you guys, right, like, you need to start sometimes looking at your stuff as you're not just making a game, you're making a product, right? It has to be viable. Like ultimately, you guys don't just want to get published, you want to sell lots of games. So, right, those two things aren't always always in sync. But yeah, the short of it is kind of as much as you want to be. So, yeah.
During your first year when you started as a publisher, were there any like common mistakes looking back that you could have avoided?
Common mistakes? So, I mean, I had a little bit of the benefit of having done this for so long, so I kind of had like a bit of a head start, right? Like I didn't have the problems that a lot of new companies have that I can't get into distribution. So when I started Renegade, my Gen Con 2014 was the first time I told anybody that I had left my previous gig and all that. And all I did at that Gen Con was meet with all the distributors in North America and Europe that I knew, which was pretty much everybody, and just said, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm starting a new company. You know, you're going to sell my stuff, yes or no? And they were all like, yeah, we know you. We're going to sell your stuff. So that was easy. And then also just meeting with designers that I knew and telling them this is what I'm doing. Let's do that. Probably I don't know if it's a mistake, but probably the biggest challenge was, and we still have this challenge now, is our bandwidth and picking and choosing what I was going to spend time on. So like if you're going to self-publish or publish, I think that's where you sometimes can fall into a trap, is you can chase things that seem really fun or might be worth doing. So mine right now, all my localization partners will cringe when I say this, but they all know it's true, is I spend a disproportionate amount of time working on localization of all our games because we've kind of exploded in the last year, and now we have all these partners all over the world, like 12 different languages that want to publish our games. These are awesome things for us and awesome things for our designers. But it takes a lot of time to do all those deals and to make all those products, and it's a big bottleneck actually in our system of all these things kind of moving through, because we manufacture all our local language stuff and then distribute it and sell it to our partners. So that's why we're hiring somebody to actually do that stuff now. Like I have to get it off my plate. So that's been our greatest challenge, and sometimes I have made the mistake where I've spent too much time on something that is not the best return on investment for the whole company. You know, but it's a bit of a trap, and sometimes I do it, it's a selfish thing because it's the thing I want to do that's really fun, right? Like, I really like doing art direction. I enjoy it. Like, I love art as a person. I collect comic book art. Like, that's a thing that I'm passionate about. Me doing art direction for all of our stuff when I have Anita, who is a professional and perfectly capable of doing it all without me even getting involved, is not always the best use of my time, but sometimes I still do it. So, because I like it. So I think I'm out of time.
Yeah, I think we got to wrap up.
Okay.
You'll be here for a bit longer to
Yeah,
take
I'll be here. If
questions.
you catch me during the day and you want to ask more questions, I'm happy to.
All right, well, I want to say thanks so much, Scott.
All right,
That was
thank
really
you.
great.